My name is Brenna Powers. I'm a physical therapist from Nationwide Children's Hospital, and I work in neuromuscular physical therapy. I have been a member of the Lowe's lab for about a year now. So we're going to be talking about remote assessments and clinical trials at Nationwide Children's Hospital and lots of different stuff and how it all connects. So on our agenda for today, we're going to be talking about clinical trials at Nationwide Children's Hospital, so past and current as it applies to individuals with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. I'm also going to be talking about the importance of natural history studies, which is what our group has a huge part in, and how it applies to you guys, and details on different outcome measures that we use and why those are important. And then lastly, I'll be tying up with logistics on remote assessments and how that applies to natural history studies and how everyone can be involved. So a big question that we get a lot is, why does the clinical trial process take so long? So a lot of the time, we're relying on sponsors to kind of provide that external funding so that we can get the clinical trial off the ground and we can host that clinical trial. So sponsors make sure that we are compliant with the FDA regulations so that we're being safe and effective, but also there are a lot of different protocols and things that we have to follow to make sure that we're staying uniform throughout the clinical trial process. So that is one thing that we have to take into consideration. Another thing would be to actually developing the gene or the intervention. So when a gene is commercially developed, it can go a lot quicker, but at Nationwide Children's, we are a smaller institution, so it can take a while to actually develop the gene and get it ready for it to be administered in human subjects. So that leads right into the point that it is first in humans. So we're doing a lot of research that is being done for the first time in humans. So there is a lot of testing that it needs to go through to make sure that the drug is safe and effective. And we want to make sure that the drug is doing only what it's supposed to do and not anything else. You know, we want it to be safe and we don't think it will harm you, but we just want to make sure 100%. And then finally, we want to make sure we are selecting the correct outcome measures. So we want to make sure that we have those outcome measures in place that are going to be able to detect those changes and track those changes over time that we would expect the drug to do. So we want to select the ones that are going to pick up those changes, and also maybe pick up other changes that we weren't expecting as well. So I'm going to briefly talk about different clinical trials that have taken place at Nationwide Children's Hospital and one that is currently going on. So although I wasn't here in 2008, I'm going to touch on this one briefly. So in 2008, there was a clinical trial for individuals with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2D, and this one was intramuscular. So what that means is they injected the gene into one small muscle in the foot, and they were testing it for safety, and they were checking to see if there was gene expression in that muscle. So once they had injected it, they took the muscle out, and they could see that there was long-term gene expression, which was good, which is what they were looking for. And then in 2015, they kind of took the study a step further, and they did isolated limb perfusion. So what that means is they put a tourniquet around the legs, and they injected the gene into one leg at first and then both legs so that the gene could be delivered throughout the muscles in the leg. And then this study kind of took on a different study type, so it was dose ascending. So what that means is they take the smallest amount of dose that can be therapeutic. So they do lots of trials with animal models as well, so like mice or rats, and they kind of see, okay, how little of a dose can we give and still have therapeutic effects? How little can we have and still be able to see changes, and how much can the gene impact? So they give the smallest dose that they've established to the first patient, and then they kind of work it up, increasing the therapeutic dose for the next patient. So the first patient only had the gene in one leg, and then the next 5 patients had it in both legs. And again, this study, the first goal was to test for the safety of the gene, and then the second goal was to see if the gene improved function, and in the study, again, long-term gene expression was observed. However, they learned that the gene wasn't reaching smaller muscles in the foot or like bigger muscles like the gluteus maximus. So there were some genes that were not, there were some muscles that were not being affected by the gene. And then in 2016, there was a new clinical trial for individuals with LGMD type 2B. So what this means is they had to start all over again because they were using a new gene. So there were 3 patients where they injected the gene into a small muscle of the foot. And so they were looking for safety and if there was gene expression. So then they took the muscle out and they looked for it. And then there was. And then in 2018, there's a clinical trial which is still going on for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2E. So this is a systemic gene transfer study. So what this means is now the gene can be transferred throughout the entire body and not just one limb and not just one muscle. And the reason that this is possible is because the clinical trial for individuals with spinal muscular atrophy, that was a systemic gene transfer study. And because that one went so well and that one was tested and it was safe and it had low adverse events, we were able to use that same systemic gene transfer for the individuals with LGMD type 2E. So the goal is to dose 9 patients, and again, this is dose ascending. So the first 3 patients got a lower dose, and then the next 3 patients got a little bit of a higher dose. So we have 6 patients that have been dosed so far. And the first goal is to always test for safety, and the second goal to see if the gene has improved function. And early biopsy results have showed good gene expression, and we are cautiously optimistic. So this is our team. This is the neuromuscular physical therapy team at Nationwide. We work in the Center for Gene Therapy. So our focus in research is we record the natural progression of neuromuscular diseases. So not only are we just recording data, but we're looking very intricately at what are the main problems, what is the rate of progression, is it the same for everybody? So we're really going into great detail to look to see what is different for everybody and what the main problems are. So the focus is really shifted to the patients and to the subjects because ultimately we want to tie this all into clinical trials and preparing for clinical trials. So we want to make sure we're using the best outcome measures and the best assessments so that we're able to track those changes over time to make sure if interventions are working the way that we want them to. So outcome measures are our bread and butter. These are the things that we really invest a lot of our time into, and we use them for measuring abilities and current level of function. So I'll talk a little bit more about this and the different types of outcome measures that we use. And we use them mainly, like I said, to measure the impact of treatment intervention and then to track the natural course of neuromuscular diseases. So how does this apply to those individuals who have a neuromuscular disease, and why do we need to test you? So I have an example coming up in the next slide, but we really want to know how the disease affects you as an individual, and then it helps us to determine whether or not treatment is making a real difference. So we want the treatments to be so successful that it's easy to tell. However, that's not always the case. So even if we can pick up smaller changes, then that can be extremely beneficial in knowing whether or not a treatment is working, and knowing how the natural history of a disease, so knowing the natural progression of a disease and how that manifests over time helps us give us a comparison so that we can know what the treatment is impacting and what kind of changes that it's actually making. So here's an example of the importance of natural history. So we have this graph over here from another study where you can see in red here is the natural progression of the disease in boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So this was done with a 6-minute walk test. So you can kind of see the natural decline that would happen without treatment. And then with treatment, so the boys that were treated, you can see here in blue. So yes, they're still declining, but at a much slower rate. So it shows that, no, this intervention was not a cure, but it helps to slow the decline of the disease. So you can see the importance of the natural history study here. So we have that kind of baseline comparison. So outcome measures cannot express the importance of this. Limb-girdle muscular dystrophy and other muscular dystrophies are a rare disease. So those who have the disease are the best people to tell us about it. We want to know what is important to you, what your daily life is like, and what types of functional outcomes you are looking to improve, because one size does not fit all when it comes to outcome measures and when it comes to testing. So we want to make sure that we are providing the best standards of care. So here's a little overview of just a few of the types of assessments that we use that you may be familiar with. So we have strength testing that just looks at individual muscle groups to see how strong you are, upper extremities and lower extremities to be more specific. And then we also have timed tests. So that would be like a 10-meter run, a 100-meter run, and then time to rise, so time to get off the floor. So those ones we use a stopwatch for, and we track to see how the times change. And then there's also patient and caregiver reports. So those are using surveys or questionnaires that you would answer over different time periods to kind of give us an idea of how your function is changing over time based on things that you do every day. And then there are different functional tests, such as the NCH. So those are looking at different tests that you do, like getting up from the floor, standing on one foot, going up and down one step. So those are kind of looking at things that are more common in your day. And then we have the performance of upper limb, which is the PUL. So that's looking strictly at upper extremity function. So looking at function of your shoulders, elbows, wrists. So these activities are tailored more specifically to those who are ambulatory or non-ambulatory. So we have tests that are transitional, so that looks at individuals who can do both, but we also have tests that are more specific and have a lot more specific items to kind of tailor those different areas as well. So we can be as broad or specific as we need to be when it comes to outcome measures. So that's why it's so important that we try a ton of them so we can see which ones work the best and which ones will apply to any given situation. And then last, we also have activity monitors. So if you're familiar with like a Fitbit that tracks your activity all day long, and I'll talk a little bit more about activity monitors later, but that also gives you an idea of everyday function and not just one time point, which would be if you just came in for testing. So Active is a video game that has been developed by our neuromuscular team here at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So the reason that Active was developed was because two boys wanted to be in a research study. So this is a true story. One walked well and one did not. So only one boy could be a participant in the study. So we wanted to invent a way to measure how a boy could lean and reach. And so this outcome measure looks at core and trunk strength, but also upper extremity strength and range of motion. So you can see by the picture here, we have a boy sitting there, and the boxes are an example of what the camera is picking up and kind of like what it's measuring. So we're reaching up above his head, both to either sides and out in front. So you can see the different dimensions that it's picking up, and it also picks up from left to right. So we're looking at how much of your environment are you able to access while you're sitting down. So the really nice thing about Active is that it's also a transitional measure. So anybody can participate, whether you are ambulatory or non-ambulatory. We can continue to track those changes over time. So we have used Active when testing individuals with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. So again, this is one of the important things about conducting a natural history study is you can see the differences here amongst the different LGMD subgroups. So here with the pink circles is LGMD type 2A, and you can see that there is like a general decline in function. However, when compared to LGMD 2L, you can see that the decline tends to be it's still a general trend of decline. However, they seem to decline a little bit slower than those with LGMD2A. So you can see that, okay, overall, everybody in this group had a general trend of decline over time as they got older. However, the rate of decline is different amongst the subgroups. And now I'll talk a little bit about our 100-meter time test. Our 100-meter time test was developed also by our group here at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So this is our substitute for the 6-minute walk test. So we found that our boys, especially our young boys, with the 6-minute walk test, it was hard to keep their attention for 6 whole minutes because kids don't necessarily have that concept of time. So they would be walking around our track and they'd be like, well, how much longer? And you'd say, oh, 4 minutes. And then they would be like, oh, how many laps is that? So it really is hard to quantify time with children. So our 100-meter time test is much quicker. And we have a 25-meter track set up, and they run or walk as fast as they can safely for 2 laps. So they go down and back 2 times. So that really kind of gives them more of an idea of how much they have to do, and they can just go as fast as they can safely. So whether that's walking or running or somewhere in between. So again, we have some data on the 100-meter time test in our individuals with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. So there are individual time points on this graph, but also individuals who completed the 100-meter time test more than once. So you can see again, over time, there tends to be a general trend in decline on how long it takes them a little bit longer to complete the test over time. So, but when you break it up into the different LGMD subgroups, you can see that LGMD2P tends to have like a sharper decline, whereas LGMD2B, those individuals tend to have a little bit slower of a rate of decline. So that is one way that we can use natural history study data. But additionally, we could see that from this group, overall, a 6-second change in time to run 100 meters is meaningful for trial success. So we can also use that kind of as our standard to detect those changes over time when it comes to a clinical trial. Now I will touch a little bit on activity monitoring. So we have used Fitbits in the past for our activity monitors. So if you're familiar with them, you know they track your steps and how far you walk, how often you're moving around in your activity throughout the day. So we would expect to see those that are stronger would have more activity. So one of the things that we have to consider is that everybody has good days and bad days. And it's the more time that you are tracking, the better of a picture you're going to get of the individual's day-to-day life. And the one thing about activity monitoring that is nice, like I said, is you're looking at an entire day, multiple days, and maybe even multiple weeks or months. So you're not just looking at one time period, like if you were to come into our clinic space and we were to test you, you're kind of getting a holistic view of their day-to-day. So what did we learn from activity monitoring? So we have a graph here about our activity monitoring in our cohort of boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So you can see generally their activity was less over time when compared to their control group. However, there is significant variations between that. So there's a lot to consider, like I said, when having more than one time point. It's good to have all of that data collected so you get more of a holistic view. And additionally, you have to adjust for the season. We found that the boys were walking less in the wintertime, which makes sense if you're not outside as much or the conditions aren't as safe to be outside and it's not as fun to be outside in the cold, that's an important factor to consider as well. So how does all of this tie together? So I'm going to talk to you more about remote assessments and what is to expect and what is to come with clinical studies and natural history studies and the direction that we are going for remote assessments. So because of this unprecedented time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've kind of been forced to look at remote assessments and investigate their utility and use for different clinical studies and natural history studies and clinical trials. So our group at Nationwide has done quite a few remote assessments, so we're speaking from experience here. The remote assessments are overall more accessible, so we're able to reach subjects locally, nationally, and even internationally, and it kind of reduces that barrier and reduces the travel burden of having to come to one spot, which is very nice. Some assessments can be performed with little to no equipment, but that is something we're still investigating, so I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. And then another thing that's really nice about remote assessments is that we're administering them in real time. So we're able to, it's almost like I'm sitting right in your living room with you, but not quite. But I can ask you to adjust your camera, or I can ask you to perform something else again, or try it a different way. So this is something that's really nice about remote assessments that we couldn't do with a picture or a video, that I can ask you to repeat it, and I can ask you to adjust maybe the view or the lighting so that we can see it a little bit better, which is nice. So like I said, our group is speaking from experience here. We've had about a 90% success rate, but there is still a lot of work to be done, so I'll cover that in a little bit. And I will explain to you the reason why we've only had a 90% success rate and not 100%. And I would say our biggest barrier right now is internet and wireless internet strength. So I'm sure all of you at some point have had issues connecting to your wireless internet, or you've had really slow wireless internet, whether or not it's just you by yourself, or if it's you on your laptop and your daughter's streaming Netflix, or your husband's on his phone. So I'm sure that at some point you've experienced that kind of low Wi-Fi signal, but also we've seen that in more rural areas, there's just not as strong as a Wi-Fi signal. So if you've had issues in the past with streaming videos, or you have a lot of buffering that goes on when you're trying to watch videos on your phone or download different items, remote assessments might not be the right way for you to go. However, there's always different ways that you can get involved. A couple other considerations just to put in the back of your mind for remote assessments is to consider lighting, so making sure you're in a well-lit room, limiting distractions, whether that be from pets or other family members. And you want to make sure that you're in a safe, clear space, because we will be trying out a bunch of different assessments, so you may need a lot more space to perform them. So whether that's an open floor or having like a sturdy chair around, we want to make sure that you are in a safe environment. And that also includes having a family member or a friend or a caregiver available as well. We could be asking you to perform tasks or functions that you are not used to performing, or something that you don't do every day. So it's nice to have a family member, a friend, or a caregiver around to kind of help you in case you need a little bit of extra assistance. And then lastly, another barrier we're kind of trying to get around is video device placement. So we want to try to establish a good spot for like an iPad or a laptop to be. Ideally, it would be nice to have it so you can view the whole room. However, I know that's not always the case. But having that laptop or that iPad propped up somewhere so that you can see the whole room, so there's a limited amount of times where you have to move it, that is ideal, and that's perfect. So like on a high table or an end table or something like that. So kind of transitioning into what I was saying with talking about why we're going to be experimenting with a lot of different outcome measures and what we need to be looking at, is that we're learning that not all assessments can be performed perfectly at home. So the 100-meter run is an ideal test. However, not everybody has access to a 25-meter track in their house or even in their yard. So we want to try as many outcome measures as we can, and so that we can get that experience to learn, okay, what's working, what's not working, and how can we improve it. So it's going to take a little bit of time in order for us to get remote assessments kind of up and going, and we also may need to be doing both remote assessments and in-person assessments. So that could be something that is also available to you, because we want to make sure that we're testing remotely exactly what we would be testing in the clinic. So it's important for the FDA and for sponsors to realize that, yes, we have this concrete evidence, we have this, all of this data that says that people and individuals and subjects can perform all of these assessments at home, and it would be just as good as they were coming into the clinic. So they need that concrete evidence and data that says that it's safe to do at home, and it's just as valid and just as reliable at doing it at home. So that's why we may be asking you to do tests at home through remote assessments, but also coming into a clinic and doing it as well. And also, we're trying to figure out what's feasible to do at home. So what tasks can we ask you to do at home? Can you perform a whole upper extremity assessment at home if we sent you the equipment? So we're also trying to gain all of that experience and kind of figure out what tests can be performed at home with an evaluator just over the remote assessment, because some tests have very, very specific criteria and you have to perform things in a very specific way. So we want to make sure that those at home who would be administering the tests are able to do so as well in a safe and accurate way. So we're just trying to gain all of that experience and try and work out as many kinks as we can before it goes into like some kind of clinical trial. So lastly, I just want to point out these different opportunities for involvement. So the first one would be defining clinical endpoints in LGMD or GRASP, if you are familiar with that. So I've listed the subtypes of LGMD that would be considered for enrollment. So we are in the process of getting ready for enrollment to open for remote assessments at this time. So if you are interested in GRASP, Nationwide Children's Hospital is a site for this study. So feel free to send us an email or you can give us a phone call, and we would be happy to provide more information to you about GRASP and see if you qualify for enrollment. And additionally, we have a natural history study at Nationwide Children's Hospital. So this is in Columbus, Ohio, and I've included the same contact information. So we are always enrolling for all types of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy and neuromuscular diseases. So if you're interested in participating in our natural history study, we're not doing remote assessments at this time. However, we're always enrolling and we can put you on our contact list. So when the time comes, if you're interested, we can include you in our enrollment and bring you into our clinic. So these are two great opportunities to be involved in natural history studies. The GRASP natural history study has a little bit more funding. So for this study, we would be sending equipment to your home with like an evaluator manual so that you could have someone there with you, like a family member or a friend who would learn how to administer the tests so that they would be administering them along with you. So there were a lot of different equipment that would come along with that one as well. So I know this wasn't exactly an hour presentation. This is still a new area that we are exploring, and there is not quite enough content to fill a whole hour, but this leaves us a lot of opportunities for discussion, and I can answer any questions that you may have regarding remote assessments or clinical studies going on right now, or even just outcome measures as a whole. So I've listed our contact information again below, so you can take that down. And even if you're not interested in participating in this study, but you would like more information, you can email us or give us a call at any time and we'll respond promptly. So thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Oh, yes, also, a recording about this video will be sent out and posted on www.lgmd1d.org. It will be under the news section. So there will be links on this recording that you could watch it again. And additionally, I know Dr. Lowry will send the link out again in an email for you guys to watch. So I am open if there are any questions, I can answer them now.
Brenna, can you share your, can we see everybody?
Yeah, let me go ahead and stop sharing. I got one question. There we go. All right, and I can turn. Okay. So if you are, I got a question. The question was, if a participant enrolls in GRASP, will visits be remote or will future ones be in person when travel is allowed? And that's a very good question. I think that's something that's still being explored at this point. It is a possibility that visits could be both remote and in person. So at this time, I know they're planning for remote assessments, but I'm not sure what that will look like when travel is allowed. So that's a very good question. And I don't have any updated information. I just know that right now all of the visits are going to be remote, but there is a potential that it could be.
Hey, Brenna, this is Linda. Do you mind if I sneak in here a minute?
Yes, go ahead.
So this Linda Lewis, I'm the PI of the GRASP study here. And so the plan is that we will have some that will be exclusively remote, a few, and some that will be half and half. And the reason that half and half is so important is we need to know if what you're doing at home is valid. So we need to compare and say that, yes, we get the same thing here as you get there. And so that's why it's really important. I know that's hard, but doing half and half is going to be the majority, and then some will be completely remote.
Brenna and Linda, can I ask a question? You know, Washington University seems to be the epicenter for LGMD 1D, and the goal was to go to one of the 7 graft centers to be, you know, part of a natural history study. But in fact, you're taking over that responsibility. Is that right?
No, we are one of many sites, so you can go wherever's closest. We know, travel is hard in the best of times.
Right.
Any site for any disease.
So any of the 7 graft centers, and you're part of the GRASP, you're part of the GRASP consortium.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. On my website, I have all the contact information for all the centers, all 7 or maybe 8, I've lost count, and their phone numbers and their fax numbers to fax medical records or send it on. So I've tried to consolidate that and make it as easy as possible for people to find a center. But it was mainly for LGMD 1D, but I mean, anybody can access that, but I've tried to make that contact information available and easy to use.
Quick question. This is Ralph Yanis. I'm with the LGMD 2L Foundation. I also see Dr. Wickland as my doctor. I'm his patient. I know he's part of the GRASP group, but I'd love to put this out on the 2L Facebook site just for, I think we have almost 200 people on that site now. So maybe I'll follow up with all of you with a call and just see what you would like, you know, in terms of such a post, in terms of information, or if you have anything I can put specifically. But I have your contact information and things like that. So would love to get it out there for you too.
Great. That would be awesome. Thank you. And sorry, not to interrupt, but I wanted to clarify on the last slide that I had with our email address, the L can sometimes look like an I and vice versa. So our email is nmdtrialinfo. So I can type it into our chat with all lowercase letters so that everyone has that clarified.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation, Brenna. This is Brad Williams from the Jane Foundation. I had a couple of questions. One is whether, where things stand with the FDA in terms of, accepting and validating remote assessments. since, obviously this is a new area. And the other is, since there are many genetic types of LGMD, and, at some level they're all different diseases, sort of what is the situation of, transferring, outcome measures across diseases like, I know that the NSAD was, used as was reported in the
Oh my goodness.
clinical trials of LGMD2E,
Coming down that
even
hallway.
though it was developed for 2B. Kind of what is it, do we have to validate outcome measures for, every type of sarcoglycanopathy or individually?
So I think Linda would be better fit to answer the question about regarding the FDA. So Linda, I don't know if you want to chime in.
Absolutely, and thanks for the question, and thanks for listening to our talk. The problem is, of course, we don't know. The FDA can do whatever it wants. But what our hope is with the GRASP consortium that we will have enough data that we can close enough. So if you are similar to another subtype, then we will be able to pool your data. So that is our goal. Our goal is definitely not to validate something on every single type. We just need to look at how it measures decline and if it correlates to what you think is going on. So if you feel like you're getting better or worse, does it get picked up by that? So hopefully, and I'm fairly certain that we will be able to use the same outcome measure for all of the groups. That's what almost everyone who's doing these trials believes. Now, as far as the remote assessments, that is why we really need to do half and half. And so we're working on changing our IRB so that we can do just that, because they won't believe it. I don't think they will believe it until we have an idea that shows that if we test you on Tuesday and on Thursday, you perform the same. So that'll be work we have to do. And then also, like I said, to make sure that what they know is in person. So that's what they're going by. So it's not a big problem. It's just has to be done. And COVID is terrible, but COVID also forced us into doing something we should have done a long time ago, is work on making trial participation easier. So we were forced into a very good problem.
So I guess if I can add one more, comment, as a participant in clinical studies, a lot of times, Brenna may have mentioned this in the talk, but just if you have to travel a long distance, that affects your performance on, some of these outcome measures. So, in person isn't necessarily the gold standard because it has different issues.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. And you didn't sleep well in the hotel, fire alarm, there's all kinds of things that influences you. So, but that's what they know. And so you're right, we just need to show, not that it's identical, but that it seems like a similarly robust process. So I think we can get there easily.
Okay, if no one else has a question, I'll ask one more, not to monopolize the conversation. I'm wondering if for people who, for whatever reason, a remote assessment, won't quite work in their home, might there be some way of, going to the nearest neuromuscular clinic or physical therapy center, and doing the assessment, not at home, but not traveling all the way to the study center, or, you know, I realize that might get really complicated, you know, from an IRB perspective. But.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great idea. The hurdle is typically with the hospital. I don't have licensed, I'm not registered to work in that hospital. So I can't perform my assessments because I'm not, you know, a member, don't have access or employees. But that's one of the reasons that we like the video game so well, is because anybody can set that up and get the same response. And same thing with the 100-meter. It's easy. So what we're looking for is assessments that don't take a whole lot of experience with LGMD. We don't have to be able, it doesn't have to be someone who can recognize different compensations. We're trying to get things that are pretty much user-friendly, user-ready. And so that's been our work, like I said, with the active video game and with the 100-meter, because then you could have a lot of different sites. You could have hub testing. We've done that with one of the DMD studies, where we have hub sites where you come to get your assessments, and then we have other places where you can even be more local to get your treatment. You've got all the right questions and all the right ideas, though. There's a lot of opportunity.
Linda and Brenna, I was thinking, you know, with people with cell phones now and video recordings and stuff like that, it seems like somebody could find easily a stretch of 100 meters, even in downtown New York City. I was part of a Duke study group about 8 years ago, and I don't know, I had to hire a videographer come in and watch me walk around in my boxer shorts and try to climb a few steps, and then that was mailed off to some group in Finland and Duke University. They found that perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, I think it'll all depend on how well we can document that it's valid. But yes, I think there's a group, Casimir, who is working on home video assessments for they're branching out. They did it for DMD originally, but they're branching out into LGMD. And so that would be, you just have standard instructions on how to record the activity. And so that, again, is we're working on it. We're trying. We feel your pain.
Oh, no. Well, I think you have a lot of volunteers out there. I think every group has, this will excite a lot of people to do the half and half. And I'm going to certainly get on the email and send out to my group your contact information, and maybe we can get a nice blend.
Beautiful. And we'll also do it when we get our natural history study, the children's solo one, doing remote assessments on a Monday and a Friday or something like that would be great for people to participate. It's a low commitment, and it would help out a lot. So
perfect.
We're doing some good things.